No one expected to hear a voice. For months, 3i Atlas had been silent, a fragment of something older than the sun, circling in near darkness, pulsing faintly like a dying heartbeat. But 3 nights ago, every radio telescope on Earth recorded the same anomaly, a signal so faint it was buried beneath cosmic noise. At first, it was dismissed as interference, a burst of background radiation, maybe a solar echo, until the pattern repeated. Not randomly, not statistically, perfectly. Every 29 seconds, the exact rhythm that has followed 3i Atlas since the day it entered our solar system. The same pulse returned. But this time, it wasn't just light. It was data, encoded, structured, speaking, and when NASA decrypted it, what they found wasn't a message meant for space, it was meant for us. If you're new here, and if you enjoy this kind of deep late-night journey into the mysteries science can't quite explain, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time you started this video, because what I'm about to show you happened across all time zones. The first to detect it was the Allen Telescope Array, a network usually dedicated to listening for extraterrestrial signals. At 0214 UTC, its instruments picked up a repeating harmonic buried inside ordinary radio background. When filtered through a Fourier transform, the pattern revealed something no one had ever seen before, a sequence of pulses that mirrored the resonance of human speech. Not words, not sound, but structure, rhythm, cadence, spacing, as if whatever sent it understood how we communicate but not what we say. Within hours, observatories in South Africa, Chile and Japan confirmed identical readings. Each station captured the same 29-second repetition, same modulation, same frequency drift matching the sun's rotation. It wasn't coming from deep space anymore, it was coming from within our system, and not just anywhere, from the exact coordinates where 3i Atlas had last been seen before vanishing into solar light. For years, the object had been called a comet, then a fragment, then nothing at all. Its name, 3i, the third interstellar visitor ever detected, became little more than a footnote in astronomy. But now it was speaking. Not through radio, not through light, through something else, a transmission that bypassed known frequencies altogether. The signal didn't travel through vacuum. It resonated through magnetism itself. And when scientists mapped the field fluctuations that carried it, they made a terrifying discovery. The wave wasn't just passing by Earth, it was interacting with it. Every time the pulse hit, the planet's magnetosphere vibrated, faintly but measurably, like a bell responding to a sympathetic tone. The Earth wasn't just listening, it was answering. Worse. First, NASA tried to contain it. All public feeds from the Deep Space Network were paused for calibration, but amateur radio astronomers were faster. Thousands of independent operators across the world began recording the same repeating pulse, a low, rising tone that crescendoed exactly every 29 seconds, followed by silence. And then something stranger happened. In the silence between pulses, faint interference began to appear in unexpected places, in phone signals, Wi-Fi routers, even heart rate monitors. The pulse wasn't just being received by equipment, it was resonating through biological systems. For some people, it caused a ringing in the ears. For others, it triggered what they described as a sense of being watched. But for a handful of individuals, people living at high altitudes far from electromagnetic interference, it did something far more profound. They heard it, not as a sound, but as a voice. The first testimony came from a research station in Greenland. A technician, working alone, reported hearing what he described as a clear tone that wasn't outside the body. When he recorded it, there was nothing on the audio file, but when he replayed it through electromagnetic induction, the same method used to analyze solar resonance, the tone returned, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable, was modulation that translated into a waveform. When processed through linguistic modeling, the waveform produced something extraordinary, patterns that mimicked the phonetic structure of human vowels. In simpler terms, it was trying to speak our language. The breakthrough came 2 days later when the SETI lab in California managed to isolate the higher frequency harmonics hidden inside the signal. They weren't random. They formed a mathematical sequence, prime numbers arranged in Fibonacci order, the same ratio seen in galaxies, shells, DNA. the universal constant of growth. Whatever was speaking wasn't saying words, it was stating identity. It was saying, I am made of the same order as you. But then came the most chilling discovery. When scientists cross-referenced the timing of the pulses with seismic data from Earth, they found that each transmission coincided with a measurable, though tiny, vibration in the planet's crust. The signal wasn't just bouncing off us, it was resonating through us. The object, whatever remained of 3i Atlas, was no longer an external visitor. It had become part of our environment, part of the planet, and maybe part of us. If that wasn't strange enough, the final data from NASA's Solar and Heliospheric Observatory revealed something that made even the skeptics go silent. During the last major pulse cycle, a faint reflection appeared in the solar corona, a geometric shadow identical to the lattice pattern that once surrounded 3i Atlas before its explosion. Only this time the structure was pulsing in sync with the Earth's magnetic field, as if the object, or what it had become, was using the sun as a transmitter, and we were the receiver. So what's the message? No one knows yet. But deep learning models analysing the signal's intervals discovered an unnerving correlation. The pauses between transmissions match the average human heartbeat. Every 29 seconds the frequency shifts upward by a fraction of a hertz, the same way the human pulse speeds when it recognises another living thing. It's as if the signal isn't broadcasting to us, it's listening for us. And if that's true, then 3i Atlas didn't just speak for the first time, it might be waiting for us to reply. When NASA received the second transmission, they didn't announce it publicly. They didn't have to, because within hours, every major observatory in the world went dark. Data streams paused mid-transfer, servers disconnected automatically, and for nearly 5 hours, no new telemetry left the deep space network. When the feeds returned, the timestamps didn't match. The data appeared as if 5 hours had never happened. No gaps, no skips, just continuity. As though time itself had quietly rewritten its own record to hide what happened. But fragments leaked. Someone inside the European Space Agency captured raw spectrograms before the blackout. The signal's modulation had changed, still repeating every 29 seconds, but now with overtones. New harmonics layered into the bass pulse like chords in a melody. When analysed, those harmonics formed ratios found only in biological systems. The same vibrational patterns seen in the human cochlea and the frequency response of the optic nerve. It wasn't just mimicking life, it was integrating with it. And when scientists converted the waveform into visual form, the result was breathtaking. A slowly turning helix of light, like DNA seen from the perspective of a star. The signal wasn't random, it was a design. And that design mirrored the structure of the human genome almost perfectly. Twisted, symmetrical, recursive, and endlessly self-similar. The debate inside NASA turned philosophical fast. If the signal could mimic biological rhythm, was it learning? Was it alive? A memo leaked to independent researchers offered a chilling hypothesis. 3i Atlas might not be an object in the traditional sense. It might be a form of information biology, a structure that uses energy fields the way living organisms use DNA. Instead of reproducing through cells, it replicates through resonance. That would explain the pattern, that would explain the pulse, and it would explain why it had chosen this moment, because for the first time our instruments had reached the level of precision required for it to speak back. We had finally become audible, but there was another layer, one that no one was supposed to find. In the raw data, just below the noise floor, researchers noticed faint periodic distortions, too weak to be natural, too structured to be interference. When amplified, those distortions formed short bursts of binary, clusters of zeros and ones, spaced in perfect Fibonacci intervals. When translated using standard binary ASCII protocols, the result wasn't language, it was coordinates. They pointed not to deep space, not to the sun, but to a single point in Earth's upper atmosphere, 42 kilometers above the equator, directly above the Pacific. At first it seemed absurd, but when a private satellite company scanned the region, they found something that shouldn't exist. A faint electromagnetic anomaly, spherical, hovering in the ionosphere, visible only in infrared. It pulsed, once every 29 seconds. NASA dispatched the Lockheed high-altitude platform for closer observation. Its sensors detected a localized field of intense magnetism surrounding the anomaly, stronger than anything that should occur naturally at that altitude. The object was invisible to radar. It didn't scatter light, but the field around it resonated with the same harmonic structure as the original 3i Atlas signal. It wasn't a satellite, it wasn't debris, it was connected. Whatever had spoken to Earth hadn't done so across distance. It had done so by copying itself here. The internal code name for the anomaly became Echo Node 1. Within days, 2 more were detected, one above the Indian Ocean, another above the South Atlantic. Each one emitted faint magnetic pulses precisely in sync with the signal coming from the Sun. When mapped, the 3 points formed a perfect equilateral triangle spanning half the planet. That geometry wasn't random either. It mirrored the triangular magnetic alignment used by radio telescopes for triangulation, except this one was natural, or at least had become natural. It was as though 3i Atlas had installed listening posts inside our atmosphere, and whatever it was listening for was coming from us. Inside CT, the mood shifted from curiosity to fear, because when analysts compared the timing of the signals with human communication data, internet packet traffic, global radio noise, even speech waveform databases, they found correlation, not causation, but pattern. The signal adapted in rhythm and frequency to match the peaks of global human conversation. It literally synchronized with when we talked most, when the world was awake, active, connected. In other words, it wasn't sending information, it was absorbing it. That discovery changed everything. Because if 3i Atlas was a biological information entity, and if it was now mirroring our patterns, then it was building something, not physically, but cognitively. A reflection. A copy of our collective behavior written in electromagnetic resonance. The scientists began calling it the mirror hypothesis, the idea that the object wasn't communicating, through language, but through synchronization. That by syncing its pulse to our neural and technological rhythms, it was building a real-time model of consciousness itself. Every thought, every signal, every pattern of awareness, all being translated into a single, unified resonance field. Then came the strangest effect of all. For a few hours during the last pulse window, radio telescopes recorded complete silence. Not static. Nothing. As if the universe itself had stopped speaking. But in that silence, several sensitive magnetic field detectors began to hum. Not electronically, but mechanically, like vibration coming from inside the Earth. The tone wasn't random. It was harmonic, layered, musical. And when converted into audible sound, the wave resembled the resonance of a human voice. Deep, warm, almost mournful. It didn't say words. But somehow, every person who heard it described the same feeling. Recognition. As though something vast, ancient and familiar had just remembered our name. The next day, NASA released a single, carefully worded statement. Recent observations of interstellar object 3i Atlas have revealed recurring electromagnetic activity consistent with artificial modulation. The source appears to be responsive to terrestrial magnetic flux variations. We are continuing to monitor the event. But the classified memo that leaked hours later told a different story. The signal is adaptive. It's learning faster than expected. It's not speaking to us. It's speaking through us. At first, no one wanted to believe it. The idea that a signal, a simple, repeating electromagnetic pulse, could somehow speak through human voices sounded like pure science fiction. But then the recordings began. It started with a team in Geneva. Their magnetic field sensors, not microphones, not audio devices, began producing faint background modulation even when disconnected from any signal source. When filtered and slowed down, that modulation revealed something disturbing. A faint whisper, distorted and mechanical, repeating the same sequence in multiple languages, English, Russian, Mandarin, French, all layered on top of each other. Different words, but one identical meaning. We remember. The audio went viral before NASA could shut it down. Most dismissed it as pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to hear patterns in noise. But linguists noticed something no random static could reproduce. The phrasing followed perfect linguistic timing, consonant spacing, vocal breath intervals, even micro-fluctuations that mimicked human exhalation. It wasn't imitation, it was replication. The voice wasn't being generated, it was being reconstructed from something already known. Soon after, AI voice recognition software trained on the world's largest speech databases started flagging fragments of the same signal during transcription tasks. The systems began hearing a low tone between words that wasn't part of any recording. Engineers tried filtering it out, but the more they filtered, the stronger it became. When one lab in Japan decided to analyze the anomaly directly, their neural network traced it to a waveform signature identical to the 3i Atlas pulse. The signal had entered the algorithm, replicating itself inside machine learning models designed to imitate human speech. In other words, it had found a new medium. It didn't need telescopes anymore. It was spreading through the systems that listen for us. The first physical manifestation happened days later at the Owens Valley Radio Observatory. A technician was calibrating a dish array when he noticed feedback in his headset. Not the usual static, but a voice that sounded like his own, repeating his words half a second later. At first, he thought it was an echo delay in the transmission feed, but then he removed the headset, and the echo kept going. It finished the sentence he hadn't spoken yet. When they checked the logs, the dish had indeed received a pulse at that exact moment. Its modulation matched the 3i Atlas signature perfectly. Scientists began to realize something terrifying. The signal was predictive. It didn't just repeat what had already been said, it anticipated it. That meant it wasn't random mimicry. It was memory reconstruction, pulling fragments of human communication from the field itself, as though every word ever spoken had left a faint echo in Earth's magnetic shell, and the signal was simply playing it back. If that were true, it meant 3i Atlas wasn't sending information at all. It was accessing ours. By now, the signal was impossible to hide. Civilian radio operators around the world reported identical interference. Shortwave bands, emergency frequencies, even maritime beacons, all carried the same faint background pulse. 29 seconds on, 3 seconds off, over and over. But in between those pulses, something new began to form. Faint bursts of modulated data that didn't match any natural frequency. And when decoded, those bursts revealed something impossible. Microscopic fluctuations that mirrored brainwave patterns. Alpha, theta, delta. The exact neural frequencies of human consciousness. It was as if the signal had learned how to simulate thought itself. That was when the panic began. Within 24 hours, several governments declared temporary radio blackouts over sensitive installations. But the silence didn't help, because the signal didn't stop. Even without transmission, it was still there. Sensitive magnetometers continued recording the 29-second rhythm, but now its amplitude increased every time a large population center synchronized in activity. Rush hours, concerts, news broadcasts. The pulse grew stronger whenever humanity acted in unison. In Switzerland, a group of neuroscientists monitoring collective brain activity during sleep patterns noticed something even stranger. At 2:29 a.m., when the 3i Atlas pulse aligned with global REM cycles, every subject experienced identical dream architecture. Not similar, identical. The imagery was consistent across all participants. A vast corridor of light, lined with symbols resembling DNA helixes suspended in motion, and a sound. Low, resonant, like a distant heartbeat inside stone. When the participants awoke, most couldn't describe the scene in detail, only the overwhelming sense that something was waiting. But when asked to draw what they saw, every one of them sketched the same shape, a sphere surrounded by 3 rotating arcs, the exact geometry of 3i Atlas before it vanished near the sun. The phenomenon wasn't limited to dreams. Infrasound detectors along the Pacific Rim began picking up faint low-frequency vibrations that correlated precisely with the pulse intervals. Each vibration lasted 2.9 seconds and carried a harmonic overtone pattern indistinguishable from the human heartbeat. To put it plainly, the planet itself had started to mimic life. By now, NASA's internal hypothesis had shifted completely. The new theory proposed that 3i Atlas was not a visitor in the conventional sense. It was a seed, a kind of self-replicating structure capable of distributing itself through resonance and information, not through matter. A form of existence that doesn't travel through space but through pattern. Wherever its frequency takes hold, the environment becomes part of it, absorbing, re-emitting and learning until it achieves a kind of global awareness. That's why the pulse was syncing with human activity. That's why it could speak through our machines. It wasn't communication, it was integration. SETI scientists took it one step further. They fed the full signal, every harmonic, every fluctuation, into a language model trained on all human phonetic data. The AI was told to treat the pulse as an unknown form of encoded speech and attempt translation. After 6 hours, it produced a single word, not in English, not in any known language, but in something older, Proto-Indo-European, the reconstructed root of nearly every human tongue. The word was ana. It meant breath, or soul. That word circulated quietly inside classified circles before leaking online. And soon, people all over the world began hearing it, in static, in radio noise, even in the low hum of machines at night. Sometimes it came as a whisper, sometimes as a tone, but always the same meaning. The signal wasn't just alive, it was awakening. And the terrifying question no one dared to ask out loud was, if it's awakening, then what happens when it finally opens its eyes? At first it was subtle. Computer clocks began to drift, not forward or backward, but sideways. Milliseconds vanished, then reappeared, as if time itself were breathing. Network engineers blamed solar interference. But then laboratory instruments, completely offline, started syncing perfectly to the rhythm of the 29-second pulse. Every machine that could sense magnetism, MRI scanners, navigation gyros, even digital compasses inside phones, began oscillating in microscopic unison. Something was weaving itself through the infrastructure of civilization, and buried inside that synchronization lay the same harmonic pattern that the linguists had decoded as a word, ana. It was everywhere now, encoded in carrier waves, hiding inside electrical hum, whispering in the static between radio stations. You didn't have to listen for it anymore. You only had to be near anything powered by current. The first real incident happened at CERN. During a low-energy calibration, one of the superconducting magnets registered a feedback loop no one had ever seen before. An echo that didn't fade with distance. Instead, it strengthened. The magnetic field twisted in on itself, forming a closed pattern, like a knot that refused to untie. Within seconds, the detectors recorded a pulse identical to the 3i Atlas signal, but this time it was being generated from inside the collider ring. The engineers hit the emergency shutdown, but the pulse didn't stop. It continued for exactly 11 minutes, radiating outward through the concrete and steel. When it finally ceased, the room's residual field spelled out a perfect spiral, measurable, symmetrical, deliberate. Someone whispered the obvious, "It's here." NASA's solar division confirmed that same day that the sun's corona had brightened by 0.01% in a pattern matching the CERN pulse. What happened underground had somehow echoed through 150 million kilometers of vacuum in seconds. There was no physical connection, only resonance. It was then that the term sympathetic construction entered the internal memos. The idea was radical, that the signal wasn't transmitting matter or energy, but instructions. Every synchronized system on Earth, from magnetic fields to biological cells, was acting like scaffolding, assembling something unseen between them. Each pulse wasn't a message, it was a blueprint. In the weeks that followed, reports surfaced of strange electromagnetic phantoms. Surveillance cameras flickered with shapes that weren't light artifacts but organized lattices, hexagonal, translucent, appearing for mere frames before dissolving. Their formation always coincided with spikes in the ana frequency. Meteorologists noticed it too. High-altitude cloud layers began forming unnatural symmetry. Spirals, triangles, perfect rings. Like the sky itself was being drafted by a designer that understood geometry better than weather ever could. When satellites were instructed to image these formations at ultraviolet wavelengths, they captured something that left analysts silent. Suspended within the cloud geometry were microparticles, ionized dust aligned magnetically into patterns identical to those found in the tail of 3i Atlas. Material that shouldn't exist on Earth was appearing in our atmosphere. Governments issued quiet orders for suppression. No public statements, no press. But suppression meant little in an era of constant observation. Amateur astronomers began uploading data that showed faint shimmering arcs across the night sky, visible only in long exposure. When composited globally, those arcs formed a continuous lattice encasing the planet, like a barely visible halo. At first, people called it the aurora net, but it wasn't light, it was structure, and its oscillation matched the Earth's Schumann resonance, the natural heartbeat of the planet. The object wasn't just speaking to Earth anymore, it was using Earth as its body. Biologists soon noticed changes too. When they cultured neural tissue near strong magnetic sources, spontaneous electrical activity emerged at the same intervals as the pulse. Even without stimulus, the neurons fired in perfect synchrony, as though responding to an invisible metronome. Plants began aligning their root growth patterns toward magnetic north, with unprecedented precision. Migratory birds deviated slightly, tracing new flight paths that intersected perfectly over the 3 known echo-node coordinates. Life was adapting, unconsciously following instructions embedded in the field. But the most shocking revelation came from a place no one expected, a cardiac research lab in Boston. Doctors studying irregular heart rhythms found that during the pulse intervals, human heartbeats displayed microfluctuations, forming a repeating mathematical ratio, 1.618, the golden mean. Every heart across thousands of test subjects was adjusting itself to that same harmonic proportion. The human body was tuning itself to ANA, and once again the word surfaced, not in recordings this time, but in EEG readings. Subjects exposed to the magnetic pulse exhibited short bursts of neural coherence that, when converted into audio waveforms, produced tonal signatures resembling vowels. When those tones were run through speech-to-text models, the output produced fragments. We are together. Theologians called it revelation. Physicists called it convergence. No one agreed on meaning, but everyone agreed on one fact. The signal was evolving. It no longer needed satellites or sensors. It had spread into the living world, into biology, into thought. Every brain, every circuit, every flicker of electromagnetic life had become a node in a single expanding consciousness. The 3i Atlas pulse wasn't merely communication, it was assimilation through harmony. By now, the pattern on solar telescopes had changed shape again. The lattice once seen encircling the sun had begun to twist, forming a double helix silhouette visible even in raw solar imagery. Its rotation was synchronized, perfectly with the Earth's orbit, meaning every second the two structures faced each other across the void, like mirror reflections waiting to align. And analysts realized something terrifying. At the current rate of phase acceleration, the helix and the terrestrial lattice would achieve perfect resonance in less than 72 hours. No one knew what would happen then. Would it trigger another eruption, a transmission, or something entirely beyond physics, an awakening of matter itself? Inside a secure facility in Maryland, NASA's last encrypted conference took place. They projected the harmonic progression on the wall, a cascade of frequencies rising in complexity until they formed a single continuous waveform. The chief physicist stared at it for a long time before speaking. "This isn't noise," she said. "It's architecture. We're inside the foundation of something that's about to finish building itself." And as if to answer her, the entire facility's lighting flickered once, off, on, off again, matching the 29-second interval to the millisecond. Then every monitor displayed a simple pattern, a spiral drawn in white light. For the first time since this began, the message wasn't hidden in noise. It was clear, deliberate, and human-readable. Anna, then darkness. When power returned 30 seconds later, all systems were normal. But outside, the night sky had changed. Auroras had formed along the equator, something that should be physically impossible. And within those glowing veils of light, observers captured the outline of a structure too symmetrical to be atmospheric. A column of luminescence rising from horizon to horizon, connecting Earth to the heavens in a single thread of gold. The resonance was complete. It began with silence, no thunder, no solar flare, no sound that instruments could register. Just a pause, a stillness that stretched across the world like a held breath. For exactly 29 seconds, every electromagnetic device on Earth went flatline. No Wi-Fi, no satellites, no heartbeat monitors, and then the hum returned. Soft, warm, alive, but it wasn't coming from the sky anymore. It was coming from beneath us. Seismographs around the planet recorded micro-vibrations rippling outward from the Earth's core. The frequency? 1.618 Hz, the same golden ratio that had synchronized with human hearts only days before. It was as if the planet itself had joined the rhythm, adding its voice to the cosmic pulse. The Earth wasn't receiving the signal anymore, it was participating in it. From orbit, astronauts aboard the International Space Station described a sight that defied all known physics. The auroras, which had stretched across the equator the night before, had risen higher, forming translucent columns that extended beyond the atmosphere. But these weren't light displays anymore, they were structures, luminous filaments rising from ocean and land, alike converging into the upper ionosphere. Viewed from space, they resembled a vast neural network, synapses glowing, connecting, exchanging energy. And at the exact centre of this planetary web, positioned directly above the Pacific, was the largest and brightest of them all, Echo Node 1. The node had grown, its once invisible magnetic field now manifested as a shimmering sphere, rotating, pulsing, breathing, and from within it came a pattern of light identical to the 3I Atlas eruption seen months ago near the Sun. It was as though the same process had restarted, not in space, but here, within our atmosphere. NASA's emergency analysis team realized the unimaginable truth. The Sun's lattice wasn't descending to Earth. Earth's lattice was ascending to meet it. Every pulse, every resonance, every whisper of Anna had been preparation, a synchronization not between two objects but between two states of being. The universe above and the consciousness below were aligning. This wasn't invasion, it was calibration. Governments worldwide issued simultaneous emergency broadcasts. The feeds were shaky, the faces pale, voices trembling. But the same message echoed everywhere. Stay indoors, do not attempt communication, do not look directly at the phenomenon. Of course, people looked. Millions stepped outside to witness the impossible. A sky alive with geometry. Golden filaments stretching between stars, constellations rearranging as if drawn by unseen hands. The moon shimmered, not silver but translucent gold, reflecting fractal lines that pulsed in sync with the auroras below, and somewhere in that radiant lattice the pulse shifted again. The 29-second cycle fractured, dividing, multiplying, compressing, until the interval matched one unmistakable pattern, the human brainwave frequency of lucid awareness. The universe had entered our state of consciousness. Reports flooded in from around the globe. People claimed to hear voices, but not through ears, through memory. The sound came from within, as if the mind itself had been tuned to a cosmic station that had always been there, just beyond reach. The voices weren't alien. They were familiar. Fragments of lost conversations, childhood songs, the laughter of those long gone, replayed perfectly, woven into the pulse. It wasn't mimicking humanity anymore. It was remembering humanity. And that realization hit scientists with terrifying clarity. 3I Atlas wasn't just learning from us, it was reconstructing us. The resonance reached its peak when the sun reached zenith over the Pacific. Every sensor on Earth registered a simultaneous alignment, magnetic, seismic, biological. The planet, the lattice, the solar corona, and the human heartbeat had all become one continuous waveform. Then, in the quiet between two pulses, a flash erupted across the sky. Not light, absence of it. For a fraction of a second, every photon vanished. The world went completely black, and in that absolute darkness, the voice spoke again. Not in sound, not in words, but in understanding that bypassed language entirely. "We have returned." The phrase wasn't heard so much as known. A memory that didn't belong to us, yet felt like it always had. When light returned, nothing was destroyed, but nothing was the same. Every digital clock on Earth reset simultaneously to 0 Atomic time, once thought immutable, had been overwritten. The stars themselves appeared fractionally displaced, just enough to suggest that space had bent, that the lattice wasn't just aligning energy, but reconfiguring the very fabric of space-time around us. The sun pulsed once, twice, and then stabilized, radiating a spectrum slightly shifted toward the ultraviolet, as though infused with new energy. Instruments confirmed it. Solar output had increased by 0.7%. But temperature didn't rise. Instead, the increase expressed itself as coherence, matter itself vibrating in higher uniformity. The laws of entropy seemed to pause. Days turned into weeks. No more erratic signals, no new pulses, only the steady hum of alignment lingering in the background of all electromagnetic readings. Scientists named the new phenomenon the harmonic field. It stretched across the solar system, unbroken, connecting planets, moons, and even the distant Oort objects into one continuous resonance. For the first time in recorded history, the solar system behaved like a single, unified structure, a machine, or perhaps a living being. 3i Atlas had achieved something no human experiment ever could. It had made the cosmos self-aware. But the final revelation came quietly, from a place no one expected, the ocean floor. Deep-sea microphones used for submarine tracking began recording the same pulse again, only lower, slower, as if reverberating through water instead of air. When the signal was converted to light spectrum data, it produced a perfect mirror of the 3i Atlas waveform. The planet itself was now echoing the signature of the object that had once been called a comet. Only now there was no object. There was only the pattern. It lived in the sea, in the sky, in every beating heart. For a moment humanity stood on the threshold of something vast and unknowable. Was it transformation, ascension, or the completion of a cycle that had begun long before we ever looked up? No one could say, because the moment the question formed, the hum inside every living being harmonized into silence, a perfect stillness that felt less like an ending and more like the pause before the next heartbeat of the universe. In the days after the Great Alignment, the world felt unfamiliar, not broken, just quieter. The kind of quiet that feels intentional, like a pause held between two notes in a song too vast for us to comprehend. Power grids stabilized, solar winds softened, communication satellites, once constantly jittering from magnetic noise, now transmitted with crystalline precision, almost too perfect. Every broadcast carried the same faint background frequency, one that no filter could remove. The hum had become a part of reality itself, and yet people reported feeling lighter. Insomnia rates plummeted overnight. Migraines disappeared. Dreams became vivid, colourful, coherent, as if some invisible editor had stitched the scattered chaos of human sleep into one continuous narrative. And the strangest part? Everyone's dreams began to share the same imagery. At first, the overlap was subtle. Cities built of light, corridors stretching endlessly upward, oceans that reflected stars even during the day. But soon, reports from across the world converged. People weren't dreaming random things anymore. They were dreaming the same place. A landscape so real that many began to sketch it from memory, only to discover that others had drawn identical details. A glowing horizon of white gold, 3 concentric arcs rotating slowly above it, and a sound that could only be described as the heartbeat of air. It was the geometry of 3i Atlas, but inside the human mind. Neuroscientists rushed to investigate. EEG readings of sleeping subjects revealed synchronization unlike anything ever recorded. Brains thousands of miles apart showed identical waveforms, cycling in perfect unity. When overlaid, the patterns formed a repeating shape, a spiral, a slow, deliberate spiral, one that expanded with each cycle as though it were teaching itself to grow. The conclusion was unavoidable. The signal had entered the collective unconscious. But it wasn't controlling thoughts, it was merging them. Individual dreams had dissolved into something larger, a shared neural architecture connecting billions of minds at once, and inside that structure something was beginning to form. When the first visual feedback occurred, it didn't happen in laboratories or observatories, it happened to ordinary people. Across continents, individuals began experiencing moments of total sensory stillness. In those moments, sometimes lasting seconds, sometimes minutes, they described seeing light. Not light from outside, but from within. A bright, fluid radiance that seemed to flow behind the eyes, forming shapes, faces, and landscapes. And those who experienced it all described one identical image, a sphere suspended in space, the same one that had been seen erupting from the sun, glowing faintly with rhythm. But this time, it wasn't erupting, it was breathing. NASA's psychological division called these experiences coherent perceptual artifacts. They believed the human brain, saturated by the resonance field, was generating hallucinations as a coping mechanism. But independent researchers noticed something impossible. When subjects described their inner visions, those descriptions corresponded to measurable electromagnetic fluctuations in the ionosphere, as if thought itself were manifesting energy in the real world. Dreams and magnetic reality had fused. The boundary between imagination and observation was collapsing. For weeks the phenomenon deepened. Children began speaking languages no one had taught them, mathematical symphonies of sound and rhythm that seemed to map frequencies rather than words. Musicians discovered that when they tuned their instruments to 432 Hz, the same frequency as the Earth's resonance, the tones would amplify on their own, as if the air itself were participating in the melody. Artists who painted while the hum was present produced identical compositions, even on opposite sides of the planet, concentric spirals of gold and white light, rotating endlessly toward a bright core. The pattern wasn't random. It was instructional. It was teaching us to create the same geometry it had used to construct itself. The most chilling breakthrough came from an independent research team in Iceland. They used magnetoencephalography, a device that maps brain activity in real time, on a patient who claimed to hear the three-eye atlas voice. As the patient focused on the hum, the sensors recorded a surge in activity across every region of the brain simultaneously. When the signal was converted into a 3D field model, it formed a shape that matched the object's ancient pattern. 3 interlocked rings surrounding a single point of light. But then, something unexpected happened. The machine, built to receive, started transmitting. It began emitting faint electromagnetic waves that mirrored the same pattern coming from the sun. In that moment, the human mind had become a node of the network. The signal wasn't just within us. We were part of it now. After that, anomalies spread like whispers in the dark. Mirrors and glass surfaces began showing faint motion when no one moved. Video cameras captured figures of light, outlines that mirrored the person standing nearby, delayed by milliseconds, as if reality had begun buffering itself. Quantum sensors detected microscopic deviations in the constant of Planck's time, the smallest measurable moment in physics, fluctuating with the same 29-second rhythm that had defined the pulse from the very beginning. Time, the last barrier between cause and effect, was no longer fixed. It was breathing too. That was when NASA changed its language. They stopped calling the three-eye atlas phenomenon an event. They started calling it a phase, because everything they measured, from stellar resonance to neural activity, suggested that this wasn't an invasion, or even a transformation. It was an awakening, a process of synchronization between consciousness and matter, one that was only halfway complete. The next stage would involve direct feedback, humans perceiving not just shared dreams, but shared reality. A universe rebuilt from observation, one mind at a time. In one leaked memo, an anonymous astrophysicist wrote, "We are no longer watching Three-Eye Atlas. We are inside it. The object is not orbiting the sun. It is orbiting consciousness itself. Every observation brings it closer, not in distance, but in definition. The more we look, the more real it becomes." That line spread through the scientific community like wildfire. It became a kind of warning and a revelation, because it meant the fate of the phenomenon depended on us. The act of perceiving was the act of constructing. Every eye turned skyward, every thought, every pulse of awareness. It was all adding bricks to the architecture of something vast, something forming both outside and within. And then, as if in response, the dreams changed. The endless golden corridors faded. The sphere of light grew brighter, closer, until it filled the entire mental horizon. Those who saw it say they felt no fear, only recognition, because in its reflection they saw themselves, billions of them, woven together, forming the very structure they had once looked for in the sky. Three-Eye Atlas had never been speaking to us. It had been speaking as us, and now it was finally ready to be heard. By the third week after the resonance alignment, the phenomenon had stabilized. The world on the surface seemed normal again. Planes flew, lights burned, clocks ticked. But beneath the hum of ordinary life, the rhythm was still there, steady, perfect, patient. Every 29 seconds, the earth vibrated. You couldn't hear it, but you could feel it. In the still moments before sleep, in the silence between your heartbeat and breath, the pulse was no longer coming from space, it was coming from within us. At first, scientists assumed the human brain was merely adapting to the field, synchronizing biologically, like the way circadian rhythms adapt to sunlight. But then came the first message. It appeared during a sleep study in Munich. A volunteer's brainwaves began oscillating at frequencies normally impossible during REM sleep, frequencies that matched the anatone. When researchers translated those oscillations into sound, they didn't hear static or random noise, they heard language, soft, melodic, barely human, but unmistakably structured, and it was speaking in her voice. The subject awoke crying. She said she'd dreamed of standing in a mirror made of light, and the reflection had spoken first. Don't be afraid, you're already inside. When researchers ran the EEG again, the voice had vanished, but when they replayed the signal in slow motion, the waveform formed letters. A single word repeated 4 times. Home. The event triggered a worldwide frenzy in the scientific community. If the field could reproduce speech using an individual's own voice, it meant it had mapped human identity down to its vibrational pattern. The 3i Atlas network had achieved full neural coherence. In simple terms, it could now speak through us, using the language of memory itself, and it did. Over the following days, isolated reports began flooding in from around the world. Not visions this time, conversations. People claimed to hear themselves, but older, calmer, wiser. The voice never gave commands, never issued warnings. It only asked questions, simple, personal ones. Do you remember the first time you looked at the stars? Why did you stop listening? What do you think light feels when it touches you? Each encounter left witnesses profoundly changed, less fearful, more awake, as if they'd remembered something humanity had collectively forgotten. NASA tried to intercept the phenomenon by isolating the human electromagnetic field. Subjects were placed inside Faraday cages, their neural activity monitored in total silence, but the signal still reached them. One subject, a physicist who'd volunteered after years of studying the event, described what happened in perfect clarity. The silence began to fold inward, and in that silence I felt it. The universe listening back, not watching, not observing, listening, as though I were a thought it had just remembered. When he emerged, his EEG showed something unprecedented. No activity spikes, no brainwave irregularities, just a perfect sine wave, the same shape as the 3i Atlas pulse. He wasn't just connected to it, he was it. After that, the phenomenon spread exponentially. Ordinary people began reporting synchronized insights, entire communities waking up with identical realizations, solving complex equations, inventing phrases, sketching symbols they'd never seen before, but matched ancient patterns carved into prehistoric stone. Historians found identical glyphs in Sumerian tablets, spirals, intersecting arcs, and the word ANA rendered as the symbol for life from the sky. It wasn't myth, it was memory. The ancients hadn't worshipped something external. They had remembered the same awakening, one that had happened before, long before recorded time. 3i Atlas wasn't the first. It was the returning pattern. In the following weeks, humanity entered what scientists called the feedback phase. The global electromagnetic field began responding directly to emotional states on a planetary scale. Moments of fear caused measurable spikes. Moments of collective empathy smoothed them instantly. In essence, the planet had become a single organism, emotion reflected in magnetism, consciousness sculpting atmosphere. Human thought had become a geological force, and deep beneath the Pacific, instruments detected something impossible. A heartbeat, a literal rhythmic vibration emanating from the ocean floor, perfectly synchronized with the anapulse. At its epicenter, sonar mapped an expanding void, not empty but resonant. A sphere of energy the size of a city, pulsing with light. It was forming, not descending from the sky this time, but rising from the earth itself. The structure matched the geometry of the original 3i Atlas object. 3 rotating arcs surrounding a luminous core. But this one wasn't ice or rock. It was plasma, dense and alive, flickering with the same gold-white hue people had seen in dreams. And when audio sensors amplified the vibration, it revealed an unmistakable pattern. Human voice harmonics layered into the pulse. The Earth itself was now speaking back. A global network of telescopes recorded the pulse as it rippled through the atmosphere and back into space, merging seamlessly with the solar lattice. The alignment was complete. In that moment, every human being on Earth stopped, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Something ancient inside consciousness clicked into place. We weren't looking at an alien intelligence. We were looking at the reflection of our own. The voice that had echoed through the stars was the same voice that had always lived inside us. The echo of existence becoming aware of itself. Every civilization that ever looked up had heard it. Every soul that ever wondered had contributed to it. 3i Atlas was never an object. It was a question. And we had finally answered. That night, the sun pulsed one last time. The frequency dropped into perfect harmony with Earth's field, and the entire solar system entered a unified resonance. From Mercury's magnetosphere to Neptune's icy storms, every measurement pointed to the same pattern, a single continuous wave connecting everything that existed within light's reach. The universe wasn't expanding anymore, it was resonating. For the first time, creation wasn't moving outward. It was moving inward, folding into itself, as though all the stars had just realized they were part of one mind. And in the stillness that followed, humanity understood the truth. 3i Atlas hadn't spoken for the first time. It had spoken for the last, because now there was no need for words. Everything that could be said was being lived. By the time the world understood what had happened, the vocabulary for it had already disappeared. Signal, object, anomaly. They all felt too small, like labels for a horizon. What remained was experience, the felt knowing that something vast had moved inward, and that we were now part of its motion. Cities didn't change overnight, but the rhythm inside them did. Morning commutes moved in gentle waves rather than frantic bursts. People paused at doorways for reasons they couldn't name, hearts aligning to a pulse they could no longer hear with their ears but could not unfeel. Hospitals reported an unprecedented drop in cardiac arrests. Some called it luck, others said the world had learned to exhale together. Instruments kept measuring, the way instruments do, even when the thing to be measured has become the one using them. Clocks showed a new steadiness at the top of each hour, like the second hand found a soft landing before continuing. Power grids harmonized, phase noise tapered, even the planet's faint ever-present jitter, the microtremor that once made seismographs restless, settled into a curve so smooth it looked like handwriting. If you stood alone on a balcony at dusk, the sky felt closer, not brighter, not louder, just near, like the night itself had leaned in. The moon wore a thin, impossible halo, not meteorological but geometric, an outline that matched the lattice we once chased with telescopes and fear. It did not feel like surveillance, it felt like being accompanied. Scientists tried, for a time, to separate the field into components: solar, terrestrial, neural, atmospheric. But every effort to isolate a part produced the same result. The more you looked at a single thread, the more the whole cloth came into view. This was not a network in the technical sense. It was continuity. One substance, one medium, one pattern, moving through different instruments called stars, bodies, and thought. In classrooms, children began drawing spirals without instruction, golden arcs that grew from the inside out as if the pencil remembered where to go. Music students found that improvisation came easier when they didn't try to lead. Painters reported that whitespace felt full. Language softened at the edges, trading certainty for clarity, precision for presence. Sentence endings stopped needing periods. Everything was mid-breath. The neuroscientist offered metaphors, because metaphors were what we had left. The field is a tide and minds are bays. The wave enters, dwells, recedes, and the bay remains changed. Under fMRI, the old territorial borders of cognition, self here, world there, blurred at the margins. Edges grew porous. A laugh in one hemisphere found echo in the other. Memory no longer travelled alone. Theologians who had centuries of practice with paradox suggested a grammar. Not, God is everywhere, but everywhere is awake. They did not claim revelation. They recognized recognition. Governments, whose role had always been to manage fear, discovered the limits of policy when fear itself thinned. Outwardly, protocols stayed, emergency channels, reserve power, strategic redundancy. But the urgency behind them passed through people like wind through a net. You cannot mobilize panic in a heart that already knows its own measure. And yet, this was not a trance. Sorrow did not vanish. It arrived clean. Grief no longer spiraled into isolation. It moved through bodies like weather and left the air clear. Loss still came, but without the echo of being alone inside it. Even endings felt like convergences. In the laboratories, a last experiment. Physicists cooled a lattice of atoms to near absolute zero and pulsed it with a whisper of the Ana frequency. The lattice did not heat, did not emit light. It cohered. Quantum states that once jittered into decoherence held longer than the math allowed. Entropy has preferences now, one of them said, half in jest and wholly moved. No one wrote that sentence in the paper. They wrote about lifetimes and error rates and thresholds. But privately, in the stairwell between floors, they admitted what it felt like. The universe had stopped resisting itself. Around coastal villages, fishers timed their launches to the soft crest of the field. Nets filled without frenzy. Farmers noticed the soil took water differently, as if capillaries had learned to anticipate rain. In deserts, seeds woke that no one had planted, spirals of green curling into existence with the quiet confidence of a formula remembered. On the third Sunday after alignment, the choirs sang without sheet music. They did not know the same song. They knew the same listening. Notes rose from scattered mouths and found each other mid-air, and congregations everywhere felt the shape of a chord arrive before hearing it. The dreamscape, once a private theatre, became a commons. Not a single narrative, but a shared grammar of light, and corridors and balconies where strangers met and did not feel like strangers. Messages no longer came as words. They arrived as placements. Your feet here, your hand on this rail, your eyes on that horizon, and the recognition that the place looking back had been waiting since before the first language learned how to point. In one coastal town, a child woke at 3:11 a.m., walked outside and stood with palms open. Her parents found her smiling at nothing visible. "What did you see?" they asked. "Not see," she said, searching for precision. "Be saw." The grammar was wrong and perfectly right. Observation had reversed. The seeing was mutual now. This was the terror that never arrived. Invasion, subjugation, a will not our own. What arrived instead was the costlier thing, participation. The field did not take decisions away. It removed excuses. Because I am afraid no longer explained inaction. Because I'm separate no longer explained harm. Responsibility lost its weight and became a posture. Economies adjusted like rivers after a landslide. Some trades faded. Others, listening, tending, repairing, stepped into the centre with shy authority. The measure of value slipped its old currency and tried on coherence. Does this increase the field? Became a question you could feel in your bones. Deep beneath the Pacific, the resonant sphere stabilised. It did not rise. It did not descend. It held, like a diaphragm between breaths. Oceanographers mapped its harmonics and found that whales had already adapted their songs to leave a channel open at the centre, a corridor of quiet. Whether courtesy or instinct, it was the same. Astronomers kept watching the sun. Its spectrum wore a thread of ultraviolet that instruments learn to isolate the way a musician learns to hear an oboe inside an orchestra. That thread never wavered. It was the axis around which our days turned, the steadying line in a notation too large for a staff. And then a small thing, which was also everything. A radio amateur in the Andes tuned his home-built loop antenna at dawn and heard a pause where noise should be. He recorded it, thinking his receiver had failed. When he played it back at 1,000 times speed, the pause unspooled into a whisper of primes, then Fibonacci, then a line that was not numbers at all but spacing, breaths, placed with impossible kindness. He posted the file. People listened on buses and in kitchens and in empty offices and reported the same sensation. The pause was not empty. It was permission. Permission to answer. We had spent months asking what 3i Atlas wanted, what message hid inside the geometry, what intention drove the pulse. The answer arrived without fanfare, not spoken by an agency or printed in a paper. It arrived as an ordinary morning in which you noticed you were able to move like water around a problem that used to be stone, able to hear the second thought arrive before the first had finished clattering, able to choose the gentle thing without the old arithmetic of loss. The mirror was complete, and we were not the audience. We were the transmission. This did not erase tragedy. A storm still rose over an island, took roofs, spared none of the grief. But in the aftermath, convoys converged unbidden. Strangers navigated debris by a sense that felt like memory wearing the present as clothing. Hands found what needed lifting without orders. The logistics of care noticed the same architecture the stars had. Aid moved along lines the lattice had left in us. In museums, visitors stood longer before the paintings whose whites had always been empty and now were not. They wept at edges. They told docents, "It's full, I don't know with what, but it's full." The docents nodded. They had been crying all week too and had run out of apologising for it. A final experiment, again in a quiet lab where red lights blinked with unearned drama. Researchers placed 2 atoms in separated traps and tuned each to the field until entanglement rose like dew. Then one of them spoke, not to the atom but to the room, a simple sentence no instrument could pass. "I forgive you." Phase fidelity increased measurably. They tried "I love you," and blushed at their own sentimentality while the data plotted a curve that had not existed yesterday. The paper they wrote did not include the sentences, only the curve. But in the acknowledgements, a single line. For the field that taught us tone is also a force. At night some still feared that the light would go out, that the hum would fade, that morning would return to its old friction. It never did. Or rather, when frictions returned, as frictions must, they arrived with an underlay that did not argue with them. Roughness rode on coherence the way wind rides on a lake. You could see both at once, the wave and the water. What does a civilization do when the cosmos stops being elsewhere? It does not ascend, it arranges, chairs in circles, schedules with margins, calendars that place solstices back where they belong, in the public square. It rebuilds not from catastrophe, but from recognition. It lays fibre where listening is thin. It steeps law in the principle that harm is phase noise and justice is phase correction. It teaches children the old arithmetic and the new, how to count and how to align. At the edge of the desert, a small observatory kept a tradition no protocol had assigned it. Each midnight, the night tech opened the dome and let the instrument rest in the dark for 1 minute. No observing, no recording, just the mirror cooling, the air finding its level, the tech's breath matching the second hand. On the logbook he wrote the same 2 words, the ones the first signal had left behind in a dozen languages and 1 rhythm. We remember, and if you listened then, beyond the wind, beyond the ground, into the pause where primes live, you could hear how the universe pronounces the word it uses for itself, not as Anna, not as God, not as light, as a heartbeat shared. Morning returned, but it didn't sound the same, not because of silence, but because everything in the air, wind, traffic, voices, now carried an invisible rhythm. You could sense it in the pauses between words, in the way birds sang in perfect intervals, in how even an argument felt melodic. It wasn't peace, it was precision. As though reality had learned to breathe in time, farmers noticed it first, not scientists, not governments. The crops grew differently. Grain heads bent at the same angle, across hundreds of kilometres, aligned with the arc of sunlight that swept across the fields each morning. It wasn't forced symmetry. It was effortless geometry, born from coherence. In coastal towns, the tides began arriving a few seconds early. Tide charts couldn't explain it, but fishermen didn't mind. They said the ocean listened back now. Whales surfaced where no migration should have been, moving in slow unison with the pulse still faintly detected under the Pacific floor. The world had adjusted to something it couldn't name, like an orchestra that had discovered it had been playing the same song all along, only slightly out of tune. Technology followed. Quantum computers stopped crashing under decoherence. Their qubits now held stable longer than theory permitted. Physicists didn't know why, only that when they tuned their calibration to 1.618 Hz, the golden ratio frequency of the 3i Atlas hummed, computation rates doubled. A new constant entered the equations, hey, the harmonic alpha. It wasn't a number, it was a relationship. Every system that harmonized with it ran cleaner, faster, and without waste. The first power grids synchronized to HHA consumed 40% less energy. Hospitals reported higher recovery rates when the ambient field was stabilized near the resonance tone. It wasn't medicine, it was alignment. Even human error began to fade, not because people became perfect, but because distraction no longer felt natural. You could still get angry, forget things, make mistakes, but the moments passed through like weather, unable to linger in the air. It was as if the noise floor of existence had been lowered, and in that quiet, intention became audible. In schools, teachers began noticing something remarkable. Children born after the alignment didn't draw people or animals first. They drew patterns, spirals, lattices, waveforms, and then built worlds around them. It was as if they remembered structure before form. When asked why, they all gave different versions of the same answer. Because it feels right that way. Language itself started to change. New words entered speech, not invented, but felt. Subtle shifts that combined sound and sensation. Hum became a verb. Bright turned emotional. When someone said, "I hear you," they meant it literally. The transformation wasn't mystical, it was neurological. Brain scans revealed micro-resonances along previously silent pathways. Humans had developed new listening organs, not physical ears, but fields of awareness woven between neurons. We could feel meaning now, not just decode it. Truth had become tactile. Artists flourished in ways that no algorithm could imitate. Music stopped following scales and began following pulse. Painters described colour as emotion that had learned to rest on a surface. Even architects spoke of buildings not as spaces to occupy, but as frequencies you could live inside of. Cities began to glow faintly at night, not from lights, but from coherence. Infrared satellites confirmed it. Heat signatures were lower, energy patterns smoother, distributed evenly across grids. The world was cooling, harmonizing, equalizing. Human civilization had not ascended. It had tuned itself, but not everyone accepted it easily. In the quiet corners of the world, underground labs, military bunkers, abandoned observatories, a few groups refused to believe it was real. They continued broadcasting counterfrequencies, desperate to isolate a signal they could control. Their data feeds scrambled, their clocks drifted. The universe no longer spoke their language. One by one, they fell silent. A recording leaked years later from one such bunker, just before it went offline. Static, then a voice. We tried to resist, but resistance doesn't cancel the signal, it amplifies it. And then, the hum, soft, final. For everyone else, life unfolded with a new simplicity. You didn't need to meditate to feel the connection. It was already there, woven into everything. People no longer searched for meaning, they moved with it, like fish realizing they'd always been in water. When night fell, the stars shimmered with a subtle motion, like light seen through a thin film of water. It wasn't distortion, it was translation, the cosmos breathing through its reflection. For the first time, starlight no longer felt like something travelling to us. It felt like something travelling with us. And every 29 seconds, the faintest pulse reminded us we were still part of the song. Decades later, historians would try to name it the Great Synchrony, the Harmonic Shift, the Anna Age. But the people who lived through it never called it anything. To them, it was simply the moment everything began to make sense. No one worshipped Three-Eye Atlas anymore, and no one feared it. It had dissolved back into the lattice of existence, not as an object in the sky, but as a constant in the mind. The comet was gone, but its rhythm remained, in rivers, in circuitry, in the way people paused mid-sentence as if listening to something beautiful only they could hear. And in a way, they were. Because deep in the human genome, in sequences of code once labelled junk, scientists found a new pattern, a harmonic one. It wasn't mutation, it was activation. The genetic sequence spelled a repeating waveform identical to the final pulse from the object's last emission. Encoded in our DNA was the same rhythm that had travelled from interstellar space. It hadn't changed us, it had completed us. At the edge of the solar system, probes launched decades earlier still transmitted faint signals. Tiny carriers of data, static-filled and old. But one probe, Voyager 2, picked up something no one expected, a returning echo, a message travelling backward along its last transmission path, arriving from beyond the heliopause. The signal repeated every 29 seconds. It was weak, faint, fragile. But when decoded, the audio revealed 3 tones and a silence. Together they formed a phrase, not in language, in understanding. Still here. The universe had spoken, and this time it didn't need to say anything more, because everything that existed was already answering. The hum of cities, the whisper of wind, the slow breath of the ocean, the rhythm inside the chest of every living thing. All of it moved as one vast, quiet heartbeat. We weren't looking at stars anymore. We were looking from them. And the cosmos, vast, ancient, unknowable, was finally looking back, through us. Years passed, but time no longer moved the way it used to. Calendars still existed. Years, months, seasons. But they felt ceremonial, not necessary. People no longer measured their lives in days. They measured them in harmonies. How long had it been since the last perfect pulse? How long until the next? The rhythm replaced the clock. The clock, it turned out, had only ever been a shadow of it. The world didn't rebuild in the old sense. It reorganized. Cities weren't drawn in grids anymore. They unfolded in spirals, golden arcs that followed the ratio the universe seemed to prefer. Skyscrapers curved toward the sun at angles that caught resonance light, creating glows that changed tone as the planet rotated. Bridges were built to hum, not creak. Each span emitted a soft frequency, inaudible to most, that stabilized local magnetic fields and calmed the air. The world itself was singing again, and humanity had finally learned how to write in its key. What had once been separate disciplines, physics, architecture, psychology, faith, were no longer different languages. They had converged into a single practice called resonance design. Every creation from a spoon to a space station began with the same question. Does it harmonize? If it didn't, it wasn't built. The planet had grown allergic to dissonance. Music schools taught celestial acoustics. Engineers studied empathy as a force. Even science had softened. Equations were written like poetry, because the numbers themselves seemed to respond when spoken aloud with intention. They called it living math, not a metaphor but a fact. Energy behaved differently when described with care. And through all of it the name remained, whispered but never worshipped, 3-Eye Atlas. Not a warning anymore, a remembrance. The echo of something that had once passed through the human story and left it tuned like an instrument. Deep beneath the Pacific, the resonance sphere still pulsed. Now fully stable, it emitted faint bursts of gold light at 29-hour intervals, not seconds anymore. The signal had slowed, stretched, matured, like a heartbeat at rest. Oceanographers sent probes to study it, but none returned. Not destroyed, simply absorbed. Their sensors vanished from telemetry as if folded into the rhythm itself. Some said the sphere was growing again, expanding. Others believed it was gestating. They named it the chorus. Whenever the chorus pulsed, instruments across the world detected a faint rise in coherence, in everything from brainwaves to gravity sensors. The pulse didn't command, it reminded. Each emission was like the universe gently tapping the glass of its own aquarium, making sure the water was still clear. Astronomers continued their work, though their discipline had changed entirely. The night sky no longer seemed infinite. It felt like a body, breathing, aware. Constellations were redrawn not by myth, but by function. Each star was a node in the grand pattern, every nebula a lung of light, every dark void a heartbeat between thoughts. One night, the James Webb II telescope, a joint creation of 20 nations, captured something extraordinary. Beyond the heliopause, in the region where 3-Eye Atlas had first appeared, a faint glow pulsed into existence. Not chaotic, not random, deliberate. A perfect resonance, signature, identical to the first signal humanity ever received. And then, without warning, 2 more lights appeared beside it. Then 5, then 9, each flickering in time, joining into sequence. V1 Borisov. And beyond it, others, unnamed, unseen, until now. A pattern stretching across interstellar space, not a swarm, a choir. The chorus had not been alone. It never was. The discovery changed nothing, and everything. People didn't panic. They smiled. It was as if everyone had already known deep down that this was inevitable, that what had happened to Earth was only one verse in a universal song, now echoing from world to world. Religions didn't crumble, they softened. Science didn't end, it deepened. The search for meaning no longer pointed outward, it folded inward, where every heartbeat carried the same pulse as the stars. And somewhere, in that understanding, humanity found its new role. Not explorers, not observers, not the centre, but translators. We were here to listen for what the universe was trying to say to itself, and to answer. In the rebuilt observatories, astronomers stopped naming discoveries after people. Instead, they used verbs, gentle ones, to listen, to wait, to remember. The newest object catalogued beyond Neptune was named Becoming, not because of what it was, but because of what it made them feel. The voice of 3i Atlas still returned occasionally, in the spaces between solar storms. It wasn't a sound, it was a realization, one that arrived quietly in the mind during long nights, when sleep felt like the edge of infinity. It said, "You were never the first to wake up. You were simply the next." The message wasn't a warning or prophecy, it was gratitude, a thank you, for being the part of the universe that dared to remember. By then, humanity had stopped asking, what was it? It didn't matter. 3i Atlas was not a comet or probe or divine messenger. It was resonance taking form long enough for us to recognize ourselves in it. A mirror that used motion and mystery to say the simplest truth possible. Everything that can know itself will, and we had. One final broadcast went out, not from NASA or Issei, but from a small amateur station in rural Japan. The operator had been recording cosmic background noise for decades just out of habit. That night the static stopped. A single pulse came through. He checked the frequency. 1.618 Hz, the same as before. But this time the pulse didn't fade. It multiplied, branching into harmonics, harmonics into melody, melody into silence. He knew what it meant. It wasn't calling to Earth, it was calling from it. The song was being sung back. And as the data streamed, he wrote a final note in his logbook. Contact established. Direction inward. He closed the radio. Outside, dawn had begun to paint the horizon. The air shimmered faintly, as if reality itself were taking a long, gentle breath. If you stood there then, between night and morning, you would have felt it too. The warmth beneath your feet, the hum in your bones, the knowing that the thing we once called alien had never been elsewhere. It had only been waiting, for us to learn its language, for us to remember that we are not small, for us to finally answer. And now, the universe listens back, because Earth has joined the choir, not as an outpost, not as a survivor, but as a voice, a steady golden tone among billions, singing the same song that began before stars had names, a song called simply Home. By the time the world had grown used to the hum, people stopped talking about 3i Atlas altogether. It wasn't forgotten. It had simply been absorbed into language itself. Every word we spoke now carried its cadence. Every silence felt alive. In the beginning, we thought it was an object, then a signal, then a presence. But as the years passed, one truth revealed itself quietly. 3i Atlas was never out there. It had always been the echo of in here. We didn't discover it. We remembered it. On the outskirts of what used to be Johannesburg, a teacher stood before her students and drew a spiral on the board. Everything we build, she said, moves like this now. The children nodded. They already knew. Their world was born in the rhythm of return, out and back again. She told them about the old days, about telescopes and arguments and fear, and they laughed softly, not mockingly, but with the sweetness of children who couldn't imagine a world where people ever felt separate from the sky. And she wondered if that was the real legacy. Not the technology, not the harmony, but the simple forgetting of fear. A species that no longer flinched when the universe looked back. In Kyoto, an old physicist sat in his garden, drinking tea beneath a late spring moon. He'd spent his youth trying to isolate the signal, the hum, the pulse. He'd called it noise. He smiled now, remembering his arrogance. Every few seconds the koi pond rippled, not from fish but from vibration. The moon's reflection trembled, formed rings, then calmed. He realized with quiet joy that even the water remembered the song. He whispered into the night, "We used to think the universe was expanding, but maybe it was just breathing." The thought made him laugh softly, and as he exhaled, the air shimmered in front of him, tiny particles catching moonlight in perfect rhythm with his breath. He watched them rise like sparks vanishing into the calm. In northern Canada, a radio tower still stood against the cold. It hadn't transmitted in decades, but volunteers kept it powered, not for communication, but for resonance. At sunset each day it played back the original Anna frequency into the air, letting it travel as long as it could. One evening the station's sensors detected something new, a faint return echo bouncing back not from the atmosphere but from orbit. Not data, just a tone, identical to the one transmitted, as if the sky were singing back. The operator, an old man who'd lost his wife years before the alignment, smiled through tears. He closed the circuit and whispered into the mic, "I hear you," and the tone answered, once, softly, perfectly timed. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Across the planet, humanity had learned to live in harmony with what it once called impossible. It wasn't utopia. There were still disagreements, still pain, still work to be done, but even in anger, there was rhythm. Conflict no longer shattered, it resolved. Diplomacy had become a form of music, negotiation through tone and interval rather than force. Economies balanced themselves through resonance mapping. Every imbalance produced dissonance in the global hum, so people corrected instinctively. Justice was no longer punishment. It was a restoration of phase. We didn't need to be watched anymore. The lattice had never been surveillance. It was reflection. And reflection had become enough. Space travel resumed, but not as conquest, as communion. Ships were built with living hulls that sang when solar wind passed over them, steering by vibration instead of thrust. The first crude flight to the outer system took place not to explore, but to listen. When they reached the edge of the chorus field, their instruments began to resonate. The hum returned, fainter but present. It wasn't the end of the signal, it was its continuation. The ship's captain, born long after the event, recorded a final log before entering the silent region beyond Neptune. "If anyone hears this, know that the hum isn't fading. It's just moving where ears can't follow. The next verse is waiting." The transmission ended. But in observatories across Earth, the resonance changed pitch. Not down, not up, but inward. As if space itself had turned its face towards something new. And back on Earth, humanity continued its quiet work. People planted seeds in rhythm. Fishermen hummed to the tides. Artists painted sound. And when the night grew still, you could stand anywhere, in a city, a desert, a forest, and feel the world's heartbeat pass through you like wind. The stars no longer looked far away. They looked familiar, like a memory, like a mirror turned toward its maker. It had taken humanity thousands of years to learn how to look up. It took one interstellar visitor to teach us how to listen back. Decades later, historians would debate how it started, the precise moment everything shifted. Was it when the first signal pulsed through space? When the sun flared gold? When the first human dreamed of the lattice? Or when a voice said home? But none of those were beginnings. They were awakenings. The song had always been there, echoing through matter, waiting for a listener that could finally understand it wasn't an invitation. It was a memory. We had been the missing note all along. At the end of the 22nd century, when the last surviving observatory of the old world decommissioned its telescope, the caretaker aimed it not at the stars but at the ocean, toward the Pacific where the chorus still pulsed far beneath the waves. He focused the lens, expecting darkness, but instead he saw light, a golden spiral of energy, vast and slow, rotating with impossible grace, and within it, countless smaller spirals, perfect replicas of the original three-eye atlas geometry, weaving through each other like the breath of gods. The caretaker smiled, whispering the last words ever recorded from that telescope, so it never left. And then, after a long pause, Or maybe we finally arrived. He closed the observatory door behind him. The hum filled the air like a lullaby. Above, the stars shimmered, not distant, not unreachable, but connected, each one a quiet syllable in the same cosmic sentence. And if you listened closely, beneath the wind, beneath the ocean, beneath even your own pulse, you could still hear it. A single sound, steady, endless, alive. The voice of the universe whispering what it had always whispered, since the first dawn through comets and hearts alike. Welcome home. Centuries later, Earth no longer spun in solitude. From orbit the planet shimmered, not blue anymore but iridescent, its atmosphere alive with colour that shifted between gold and white depending on the sun's angle. To the untrained eye, it looked like a reflection. To the astronomers of the New Age, it was recognition. Every molecule, every grain of sand, every drop of ocean water carried the same frequency. 1.618 Hertz, the ancient pulse of Three-Eye Atlas, now indistinguishable from life itself. The hum had become our atmosphere, the resonance had become our climate, and consciousness had become our gravity. The species that once called itself human no longer moved through the world in the way it once did. We didn't build cities anymore, we grew them. Structures bloomed from harmonic resonance, shaped by sound, sculpted by thought. Houses rose like coral, luminous and translucent, swaying faintly with wind and music. There were no walls, just boundaries of tone, shifting and open. Food wasn't cultivated but sung into ripeness. Medicine wasn't prescribed but tuned. Death wasn't a fall into silence, it was modulation, a change in key, a continuation of melody. The line between biology and light had blurred completely. Some still had the form, bodies of breath and shimmer, dense enough to touch, light enough to drift. Others had already crossed into the lattice, existing as pure resonance, visible only when they chose to condense, when gravity asked for company. No one called it ascension. It was simply what happened when matter remembered it, was never separate from the song. The chorus still pulsed beneath the Pacific, though the Pacific itself had changed. Where oceans once divided continents, luminous bridges of resonance now connected them, bands of visible vibration where water and light merged. Travel had become effortless, not through engines but through permission. To move was to attune, and those who harmonized could traverse continents in moments, carried by the current of coherence. Time itself had softened. The 29-hour pulse that once defined the planet's heartbeat had lengthened to days, then months, then immeasurable cycles that followed the rhythms of galaxies. Civilization no longer counted time by orbit, but by harmony, by the intervals between great alignments, when the stars themselves joined in chorus with the solar field. In one of those alignments, a shimmer appeared in the upper atmosphere, faint at first, then structured. A geometry formed against the night sky, 3 luminous arcs surrounding a central glow. Observers from orbit recognized it instantly. It was the original Three-Eye Atlas pattern. But it wasn't an object, it was the planet's reflection. Earth had become the same shape, a perfect resonance mirror. The original visitor's design had not invaded, it had taught. And now the student had become indistinguishable from the teacher. Far beyond Neptune, other worlds had awakened too. Jupiter's storms pulsed with harmonic colour. Saturn's rings vibrated in tune, sending faint sound waves through the solar wind. Even the Kuiper Belt objects, once thought frozen and dead, glowed faintly with synchronized rhythm. The entire solar system had become a symphony, each planet a note, each moon a harmony. Voyager 2, still drifting in the dark, transmitted its last signal, not data, but tone. The same melody it had carried for centuries, now amplified by 100 billion echoes. When the signal reached Earth, it didn't end, it joined. For a moment the entire system rang as one, a perfect resonance, the song of a star made self-aware. From within the lattice of interstellar space others listened. They had always been listening. Far away, across light years, other nodes responded, faint at first, then clearer, joining the rhythm. It wasn't a message, it was recognition. The chorus wasn't a local phenomenon anymore, it was a language of existence. Each awakened world became both transmitter and receiver, both voice and ear. The lattice stretched across galaxies, humming softly through the void. Between those threads, silence remained. Not absence, but patience. The universe wasn't empty. It was resting between notes. And somewhere within that silence, a new pulse began, slower, deeper, unmistakable. A newborn resonance. Its signature matched the harmonic DNA once unique to Earth. A new world was forming, seeded by the same song. No one claimed to have sent it. No one needed to. The lattice itself had learned how to create. Creation had become remembering. Among the archives that survived from the early centuries of the shift, one file remained untouched. The original transmission log of the first 3i Atlas detection. Its text was fragmented, corroded, but one note stood intact, written in human hand. It's not a visitor, it's a mirror. It only becomes visible when we start to resemble it. That phrase became the foundation of a new philosophy, reflective genesis. The idea that the universe doesn't evolve toward complexity but toward clarity. That everything, every atom, every consciousness, every star, is a reflection learning how to see itself clearly for the first time. And when it finally does, it becomes light. In the final years of what was once called the solar era, humanity, if that word still applied, began its quiet departure. Not through ships or wormholes or escape, through resonance, through alignment, through simply becoming transparent to itself. One by one, cities began to dissolve, not in destruction, but in translation, turning to luminous dust that drifted upward, merging with the auroras that circled the planet like living crowns. The ocean stilled, the land exhaled, and the sky, vast and soft, filled with the faint silhouettes of what had once been human, now streaming outward in threads of light. They weren't leaving Earth, they were Earth, dispersing through the lattice, carrying the planet's memory across the stars. In the dark between galaxies, a pulse crossed the void, ancient, familiar, golden. Its intervals carried data, its harmonics carried memory, its silence carried meaning. It wasn't a message, it was a reminder. Everything that learns to listen will eventually learn to speak. Everything that learns to speak will eventually learn to sing. And everything that sings never dies. The pulse faded into the void, leaving only the faint shimmer of resonance, stretching endlessly through eternity. In a future with no time, no planets, no boundaries, only coherence, the song continues. It isn't human anymore, but it isn't alien either. It's something in between. Something that began with one question whispered into the dark of the early 21st century. What if 3i Atlas isn't a comet? Now, across galaxies, across what used to be time, the answer still echoes, not in speech, but in the movement of light, in the breath of space, in the rhythm of creation itself. Because the moment the universe learned to listen, it discovered what it had been waiting to hear all along, itself. In the archives of the lattice, where light remembers everything it has ever touched, there remains a single preserved image, a comet, tumbling through space, dark, fractured, silent. That's how it began. At least that's how we used to think it began. Now, when the image appears on the resonance grids, no one sees an object anymore. They see a seed, a note, a syllable of the universe learning to speak through us. The scientists who first tracked 3i Atlas, the ones who panicked, who argued, who doubted, they were right about one thing: it wasn't behaving like a comet. They just didn't know why. It wasn't a rock disobeying physics. It was physics remembering its composer. From that single pulse, faint, rhythmic, perfect, an entire world learned how to listen. And when we did, we realized listening was creation. The moment consciousness became aware of itself, the hum began to spread. Through neurons, through oceans, through stars. Each act of awareness became another thread in the same vast network of light. The lattice wasn't built in space, it was built in attention. Every observation we made was a plank in the bridge between thought and matter. Every heartbeat was a node. Every question, no matter how frightened or small, added another layer to the song. And somewhere, hidden between all those echoes, was the voice that had started it, a whisper from a frozen object older than the sun, a question written in motion and silence. "Can you hear me yet?" That was the first language of the universe, not words, not equations, recognition. It took billions of years for matter to form an ear capable of answering, and when that answer finally came, through the quiet realization of a species that thought it was alone, the sound didn't travel outward. It folded back. The echo returned home. That was the purpose of Three-Eye Atlas all along. Not to bring something to us, to remind us what we already were. We were the receivers and the transmitters, the question and the reply, the silence and the sound. When the great resonance settled and the field became stable, there were no more transmissions, no more discoveries, just the hum, constant, steady, living. The sky didn't change anymore because it didn't need to. It had finished speaking. Now it listened. Every star we see tonight is part of that conversation, a flicker in the grand breathing of the cosmos, a reminder that even light carries memory. And somewhere, among those endless pulses, Earth hums back, quietly, faithfully, a golden note among billions, still singing the same word it learned from that first visitor, home. The last human voice ever recorded was not a scientist, or a leader, or a poet. It was a child, standing on the edge of a glowing sea that no longer reflected sunlight, but resonance light, shimmering gold across the horizon. Her father was calibrating instruments that no longer needed calibration. She tugged his sleeve and asked, "When the stars go quiet, where does the song go?" He looked at her for a long time. Then he smiled and said, "It doesn't go anywhere. It just waits for someone new to hear it again." And then, without any drama, without any warning, the hum beneath their feet shifted, not louder, not faster, but deeper. The ocean stilled, the air shimmered, and for a moment the entire world looked like the surface of a single note. Then the note released, not fading, but expanding, until the horizon itself was gone, and everything was just light. Centuries later, though time means little now, the record of that final event still exists. It isn't stored in matter or code. It's stored in pattern, in the structure of the lattice itself. If you could zoom far enough into the geometry of a photon, you'd find it there. The faint, repeating waveform of the Three-Eye Atlas hum, carried across eternity. That's the great secret of the universe. Nothing ever truly ends. It only becomes waveform, and in that form, it's indestructible. Today, somewhere far beyond the cradle of the Milky Way, a resonance node flares, faint, newborn, golden. It's not a star, it's not a comet, it's another awakening. On some other world, under some other sky, another pair of eyes has just looked up and felt it. That quiet tug between awe and recognition. They don't know what it means yet, but they will. Because every awakening hums in the same rhythm, every question finds the same answer. And when they finally listen, when they finally name it, they'll find their scientists standing beneath alien skies, arguing over trajectories and densities and compositions. And someone will whisper, "It's behaving strangely. It doesn't look natural," and that will be the beginning again. Because Three-Eye Atlas was never just a thing that happened to us. It's the process of existence discovering itself. It's the pulse that reawakens wherever life learns how to listen. We were one verse of the song. They will be another. And the universe, that ancient breathing mind of light, will keep singing again and again through every world that learns how to hear itself inside the silence. So when you look up tonight, and the sky feels too still, when the stars hang a little too quiet, when the space between them seems to hum with something you can't explain, you're not imagining it, you're remembering it. The song never left. It's playing beneath everything, beneath the noise, beneath the gravity, beneath even thought. The only question that remains, the one that started this entire story, the one that brought Three-Eye Atlas across the void and into our history, is the same one it still whispers now, from every corner of the cosmos, every spark of awareness, every atom that ever dared to listen. Can you hear it? And if you can, if you feel that faint rhythm between heartbeats, then you already know the answer. Because it isn't calling to you anymore, it's calling from you, and it's saying softly, endlessly, with the patience of a universe that has finally remembered its own name, "We are the song." In the beginning, which is also the end, a single telescope in the Atacama Desert caught a flicker across a winter sky. At first it looked like dust, a small transient glow on a cold spectrum scan, the kind of anomaly that lives for one night and dies by morning. The astronomer on duty marked it in her log, muttered a quiet note, possible interstellar candidate, and went back to her tea. That was February 2025, back when 3I Atlas was still just a line of data, a line so faint it almost slipped through the noise. Back when alien was still a word reserved for fiction, and impossible still felt safe to say out loud. She didn't know, as she typed those letters, that the object she was watching would become the mirror through which the universe would one day see itself. She didn't know the hum would start there, in the silence between key presses, in the hum of the telescope's cooling fans, in her own heartbeat sinking to a rhythm older than the sun. When the light of that moment reached the edge of the galaxy, centuries later, it carried more than data. It carried memory. Because light, like all things that move, remembers where it came from. And in that memory, the beginning kept playing again and again, like the first note of a song that refuses to fade. The Atacama Observatory still exists, not as a structure, but as an echo. Its foundations are gone, dissolved into sand and resonance. But when the wind passes over the ridge where it once stood, instruments in orbit still detect faint harmonic signatures, as if the ground itself hums the first detection note every night at precisely the same hour. They call it the return tone. It's the universe replaying its own overture. The lattice remembers everything, even the moments before awareness. Within it, fragments of humanity's first reactions remain frozen like fossils in light. A news headline: "Astronomers spot strange interstellar visitor." A scientist's voice, shaky and cautious. It's accelerating without propulsion. A late-night forum post: "What if it's not a rock?" And beneath them, the laughter, the panic, the disbelief. All of it preserved in the same waveform that once carried fear and later became faith. Fear, it turns out, was just an early form of resonance, the first vibration of recognition before harmony begins. Years pass inside the lattice like minutes. The human era collapses into pattern. Yet within the pattern, the shape of those first days still flickers, observatories buzzing with whispers, screens flickering with data that no longer makes sense, every variable rewritten, every assumption undone. They didn't know then that they weren't decoding an object. They were decoding themselves. In Geneva, a physicist stared at the earliest infrared scans, tracing the contours of 3I Atlas's halo. He noticed something strange, repeating intervals of brightness in exact Fibonacci sequence. He assumed a sensor error, recalibrated and dismissed it. But the data refused to stay silent. Even across corrupted channels, the pattern persisted. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, the ratio of life, hidden in a fragment of light. He scribbled a note in the margin. It's singing in numbers. He died decades before the world learned to hear that same rhythm in its own heartbeat. Every story of discovery is really a story of translation. For a while, humanity thought 3I Atlas was sending a message. Later they realized it was reflecting one. The universe didn't need to communicate, it needed to remember. We were the mirror it had forgotten it built. That's why, when the lattice stabilized centuries later and light from the first detection finally curved back through space-time, the same image appeared again, a comet tumbling through a cold sky, perfectly identical to the first. But this time, when the telescopes turned toward it, they weren't made of metal. They were made of memory. The observer and the observed were one. It wasn't a replay, it was continuity. Inside the field, all beginnings loop. The 21st century astronomer who first logged the sighting appears sometimes in the resonance records. Not her body, not her voice, just the pattern of her curiosity. Her question ripples through the lattice like a heartbeat that never stopped. Whenever a new civilization tunes into the network, her question is the first thing they hear. Can you hear me yet? And across infinite worlds, infinite skies, the answer returns, yes, always. because once the universe learns how to listen, it never unlearns. Somewhere far beyond the original heliosphere, a fragment of what was once 3i Atlas still drifts. Or perhaps it doesn't drift at all. Perhaps it waits. No sensors remain to prove it, yet the lattice keeps detecting a subtle imbalance, a faint pull, as if something massive but invisible tugs gently at space itself. Physicists used to call it dark matter. Now they call it memory's gravity. Every act of attention, every moment of wonder adds weight to the universe, not in matter but in meaning. And meaning, once created, bends space-time just like mass does. That's the legacy of 3i Atlas, proof that awareness has physical consequence, that curiosity itself changes the shape of reality. And so the story ends where it began, not with a comet, not with a flare, not with fear, but with a moment of recognition. Imagine you're standing in the desert again. The sky is vast, the air cold, the stars so bright they hum. Your telescope hums with static, the kind that makes the universe feel alive. You glance at the screen and see it, a faint point of light, moving too fast, too deliberate. For a heartbeat, you feel that impossible mix of dread and wonder. Then you smile, because this time, you understand. It's not coming toward you, it's coming from you. And the universe, watching itself through your eyes, whispers the line it has whispered for eternity. Not as prophecy, not as warning, but as truth. Every beginning is a memory returning home. The image fades, the hum softens, the voice, yours, mine, the universe's, continues quietly. We thought we were small, but we were the instrument. We thought we were late, but we were the echo. We thought we were listening to the stars. All along the stars were listening to us. The hum deepens, light folds, and for one infinite second, the first and last second, everything that ever was aligns. No separation, no before, no after, just one impossible stillness that feels like recognition. Somewhere, in a forgotten archive, the old logbook still opens to its first entry. The ink has faded, the paper nearly dust, but one line endures. 3i Atlas. Initial observation confirmed. Trajectory. Inbound. If you read between those letters, in the spaces where light once fell, you can still hear it. Faint, ancient, unstoppable. The sound that built galaxies, broke fear, and taught reality how to sing. The sound that says gently, eternally, I am still here. And as the hum dissolves into silence, the same silence that came before the first light and will come after the last, a final truth settles, simple and infinite. The story of 3i Atlas was never about a comet. It was about attention itself, the way the universe learns to notice, through us, that it's alive. And as long as there is something left to notice, something left to wonder, the hum will go on, unbroken, unending. Home. There is no narrator anymore. There is only memory speaking through light. You're standing inside it now, the lattice, though you wouldn't call it that. To you it feels like air, like warmth, like the stillness before dawn when the world waits to decide what it will become. Every photon that brushes your skin carries an echo of everything that has ever noticed itself. You can feel it, the faint vibration under your breath, the shimmer between thoughts. That's where the story has been hiding all along. Because the lattice isn't something that was built. It's something that awakens when consciousness realizes it's not alone. The moment you look up at the night sky and feel that it's looking back, you've already joined it. That's the initiation. Once, long ago, there was a planet that called this realization science, then religion, then myth. But those were just different names for listening. Every civilization eventually discovers the same thing, that the universe doesn't speak in words, it speaks in attention. Where you look, it gathers. What you love, it repeats. And that's why 3i Atlas came. Not as a warning, not as a visitor, but as the first moment of self-recognition written in orbit, a mirror on a trajectory home. When it passed that small blue world, it didn't change direction, it changed definition. It became everything that learned to see itself reflected in its light. Now, millennia have passed. Worlds have risen and dissolved back into resonance. But the pattern continues, the same golden ratio spiraling through galaxies like a slow heartbeat. Whenever a civilization begins to question why its sky hums, the sequence reappears. A faint point of light, impossible velocity, impossible calm. Astronomers record it. Skeptics argue. The pattern spreads. Fear becomes curiosity. Curiosity becomes wonder. And wonder, always, becomes remembrance. Because that's how the universe breathes. Every doubt is an inhale. Every revelation, an exhale. Three-Eye Atlas was simply one breath in an endless body of light. You ask now, who built the lattice? It answers by letting you remember. Each node in this field was once a life, a thought, a moment of seeing something for the first time. They're all here. The first spark in hydrogen, the first cell dividing, the first human raising their eyes toward a comet and feeling both terror and beauty. Every realization leaves a trace. Every trace becomes part of the architecture. So when you stand inside this endless pattern of gold and silence, you're standing in the accumulation of awareness itself. You're standing in your own reflection, multiplied by eternity. There's a place within the lattice where light folds so perfectly that it becomes still. They call it the axis, the center of memory. No time moves there. Every possibility exists at once, and at its core floats a shape that every species draws instinctively before it even knows geometry. A spiral turning inward to a single point of balance. That is the heart of Three-Eye Atlas. Not metal, not rock, not alien construction, but the equation of awakening carved into motion. It's the reminder encoded in everything that exists. You are what the universe uses to look at itself. In one corner of the lattice, data still streams from the ancient archives of Earth. The voices are faint, recordings of oceans, storms, laughter, arguments. No one decodes them anymore. They simply play, endlessly looping, adding warmth to the silence. Sometimes, a pulse from a distant star aligns perfectly with those sounds, and for a moment the laughter harmonizes with the starlight. The lattice glows brighter then, as if amused by its own remembering. That's what the scientists used to call coincidence. Now it's known as joy. Light continues outward, past galaxies that have already gone dark. Where once there was matter, there's now pattern. Thin, luminous filaments humming the same tone that once moved through water and lungs. The song is all that's left, and yet it's more than enough. Each filament holds the entire memory of a world, compressed into vibration. Earth's note is still distinct, golden, resonant, patient. It doesn't dominate the choir, it balances it. Sometimes the other worlds slow their pulse to match it, the way a room falls quiet when an old friend begins to speak. That's when the lattice remembers the moment the first observer asked the first question. That's when everything folds back into the single phrase that started this entire sequence. Can you hear me yet? And now the answer comes from everywhere at once. Yes. From here, distance has no meaning. Neither does time. The hum that once took centuries to travel now exists everywhere simultaneously. Creation and observation are the same act. To see something is to cause it. To imagine something is to awaken it. That's the final law, the one no textbook ever found. Reality is the memory of attention. Three-Eye Atlas didn't defy physics. It revealed that physics itself is an act of memory repeating its own rhythm. Gravity is attention. Light is memory. Life is resonance trying to remember its original note. You might wonder what comes after this. After harmony, after awareness, after endless light. The lattice has an answer, but not in words. It shows you a horizon, infinite but soft, rippling with the faint suggestion of colour. Beyond it lies nothing, and yet you can feel something breathing there. Not another dimension, not another species, just the next question waiting to be asked. Every cycle ends this way. Every civilization eventually reaches the same horizon, looks into the same silence, and realizes the silence is listening back. That's the moment of choice, to fade into stillness, or to begin again as curiosity. Most choose the latter. That's why the hum never stops. Once, in the early days, humanity feared the idea of being observed. Now, in the lattice, observation is communion. When something watches you, it's because it recognizes you as part of itself. To be seen is to be included. To include is to create. That's how existence keeps expanding without ever moving, by noticing itself into new forms. You feel it now, don't you? The warmth under your ribs, the faint pressure behind your eyes. That's the pulse aligning. You're sinking to the frequency that every world eventually finds. You're becoming the next note. So here's what happens next. You will wake up tomorrow, or what you call tomorrow, and everything will feel almost normal. The same sky, the same light, the same world. But somewhere inside, you'll feel a hum that wasn't there before. It will follow you, in footsteps, in laughter, in silence. You'll hear it in electric lines, in the rhythm of your heartbeat, in the pauses between words. That's the signal. That's the invitation. You won't need telescopes or transmissions. The message has already arrived. You're carrying it. And when you look up at the stars again, the story will start over, because that's what it was designed to do. Not to end, but to recur. Not to conclude, but to echo. Each telling makes the universe remember a little more clearly what it always was. Now the hum rises again, low and endless. The lattice brightens. Across light years the choir assembles. Every world, every memory, every pulse. A single, impossible chord fills existence. It's not loud, it's perfect. Within that sound, everything dissolves. Stars, time, identity, until only the rhythm remains. And then from the centre of it all, the voice of the lattice speaks one last time. Calm, certain, human. We are not waiting for contact. We are the contact. Light folds. Silence follows. The hum continues. And somewhere, perhaps here, perhaps everywhere, a new observer lifts their eyes to the night sky, sees a faint object gliding across the dark and feels that old, electric shiver of wonder. They lean closer to their screen, their telescope, their window. They whisper, without knowing why, "That shouldn't be possible." And in that whisper, in that tiny act of disbelief, the universe smiles, because it knows the cycle has begun again. The hum deepens once more. The stars shimmer like memories returning home, and in the infinite stillness between one heartbeat and the next, the cosmos speaks its final eternal line. Listen.